Recording started.
Okay, recording has begun. Welcome to the July 12th edition of the study hall. Today we're doing more problems in strengthening and weakening in critical reasoning. So more meaning we've had a session on these already. We will, just in case you haven't seen that session, the previous session was about a year and a couple of months ago. I think it was somewhere in February or March of last year. We had a session on strengthening, weakening. But it is one of, in fact, it is the most common type of critical reasoning problem. So strengthen, weaken is the most common type of critical reasoning problem on the exam. In fact, it does account for something like half of all of the critical reasoning section. So meaning it's about as important as all the other question types put together. So it's very important that you have a solid foundation in this question type. So you guys know the drill, at least if you've been here before, you do. We have to go through the rules before we start. So here are the rules. No submissions that are too general, please. Some people have submitted things like, how do I solve verbal problems? Or how do I do things faster? I mean, whereas I can get it, I see why you're asking these questions. They're not really questions that are meaningful study hall topics. These are not things that can be addressed in an hour and a half. This is the big thing that you really need to pay attention to. Please do not just submit random specific problems. Okay, that's what our forum is for. So if you just submit a problem or two problems, and especially if you're just asking about like one answer choice, please do that on the forum. That's actually the entire reason we have a forum, is for questions like that. So this is the big thing. Oh, let me take away whiteboard privileges, because that is bad. Okay. All right, so, okay, we're all grounded from using the whiteboard now because someone was dragging things around the board. So, okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay, close enough. Please don't submit personal study plans. This is not the place for that. Remember, this is a recording that's watched by hundreds of people, so this is not the place to post, here's my scores, and here's where I want to apply to school, and so on. There is a place for that. The place for that is the forums on our Ask an Admissions Consultant folder or our General Questions folder. If you have study plan questions and things like that, that's the General Questions folder. If you have questions about admissions, then we are not an admissions company, but we partner with MBA Admission, which is. So we have a guest spot on our forums for MBA Admission to answer your questions about admissions. So there's a folder for that too. Submissions should be topics of intermediate depth with a tie-in to a more general question. So it is nice if you submit specific problems, but remember that you should not just submit a specific problem. You should also tie it into a question. Otherwise, it just belongs on the forums. But if you have a more general question to ask, then that makes sense here. Also, please no official guide problems. If you submit problems from the official guide, we cannot use them, and so that means you're just kind of wasting your time sending them in, because GMAC has asked us not to use those problems, so please don't use them. We can't. No official guide, no single questions with no larger context. This is just examples of things we can't use. We can't use this, and this is for our forums. This is what you should put on the forum, is single questions like this. Finally, yeah, etiquette, important. You know, I know there's a language barrier here with some individuals, but remember that this is a gathering of potentially future business people, and business is all about relationships and etiquette and all that kind of fuzzy stuff. And So you got to learn to not come across as rude, even if it's unintentional. So for example, it may just be translations of things that are perfectly polite in other languages. But if you say, like, I expect this, or you should do this, that's not really acceptable in professional context. So unless you're the boss and you're talking to a subordinate, which is not really the case here. So there you go. Take note. All right, finally, please check the archives. There are, I think, over 60 of these recordings now, so that's a lot of recordings. That means that a lot of topics have probably been submitted already. What this means that you should do is check to see if your topic has already been covered. If it has, watch the video. If your questions are answered, then great. If not, if there's anything that is not covered in the video that you would like to see covered, then please tell us what that is. Unless it's a very, very, very major topic. I mean, for example, today's topic is more strength and weaken type problems, and that's 50% of the critical reasoning section. So that is sufficiently important that you can submit something like, oh, let's cover more strength and weaken because there's so many of them. But otherwise, if it's a minor topic, like we've had people asking for combinatorics and stuff like that, we've already had a combinatorics session, and combinatorics is only like 3% of the problems on the test. So one session's enough for that. So those are your rules. Smiley face if you understand those rules. Smiley face icon over there, and yeah, that thing. It's over there next to underneath the window with the names in it. Okay, nice. So we're going to start, for those of you who are just joining us, again, the topic today is more problems in strengthening and weakening critical reasoning problems. So let's do it. All of the problems that are in these slides are from GMAT Prep, so except for the ones that are labeled as Manhattan GMAT problems. So the GMAT Prep is free software, which is why we're allowed to use the problems here, but we are supposed to have the copyright notice here. So there you go. Okay, so what we're going to do is, if you're an old timer here, then you're going to know this already, but we are going to give you multiple choice options. And your answers will not be visible to other people. Here is what you should see underneath your window of names on the top left is this. You should see this. These are your multiple choice answers. These are the buttons that you should use to answer the question. So if you're an old timer here, you already know this, but please use these letters to answer the question. Important that you click only once on your choice. If you click a second time, you'll erase your answer. So those are in the corner there, and then when we're finished with each question, we'll go ahead and publish the question stats on the board. So problems mostly from GMAT Prep, some from our CAT software. Let's do one. All right, go ahead and try this problem. Remember to please use these buttons to answer the question. In other words, please don't answer the question in the text box. Otherwise, other people might be unfairly influenced. So here's a timer. Go for it. Hey everybody, that's a reasonable amount of time for this problem. It's actually over 2 minutes. This is a problem about average length. Remember, we've discussed this in other sessions, but the time you spend on the problem should be, correlated to how long it is. So this problem is neither exceptionally long nor exceptionally short. So that means that you should be spending about an intermediate amount of time on it, aka about 2 minutes. So if you haven't picked something, you should. Remember, this is a test where you have to pick an answer to every problem. So if you are Ari, that means you have to pick an answer, please. Okay. There you go. All right, so people have answers. Let's go ahead and look at the class statistics here. There you go. So we have a majority in favor of C, but there are some substantial minorities. Okay, all right, thanks for the notice. We have some substantial minorities picking other choices, but let's go ahead and take a look. So first of all, let's talk about the underlying attitude towards strengthen and weaken problems, the underlying mentality. So we'll revisit that problem in a sec. But what's the underlying mentality for strengthen and weaken problems? So who can, I mean, it's very general, it's very generic question. So there's a lot of things that you could say here. But let me open this up to contributions from the floor here. So go ahead and, if you have any inputs into this question, go ahead and type them in the text box, please. Like, how should you think about these problems? See what people have to say here. So there's currently only one person typing, but no one else has anything to say. In other words, how should you think about the situation in general? See what people have to say. Still only 2 of you guys typing. Everybody else is being sort of reticent. Yeah, okay. SJ, that's a little bit specific. I'm talking more about a very general way of thinking. Very, very general. Like, what's the focus? One way of rephrasing what I'm trying to ask you. Find out assumptions and conclusion. That's getting closer. Let me put that on the board. Okay. Identify the type of conclusion, or identify the type of question. I mean, okay, but we're talking about, in other words, we've already identified the type of question. We're talking about this type of question. So yes, you should figure out what type of question you're dealing with first, but we're assuming that that's already done. We already have this question type. But yes. A couple other people are typing. For strength and Jenna, for strength and problems, the answer may provide it. Just strength and problems, or strength and problems and weaken problems? That's not the graphic I want. It's both, right? So this is a good point. So let's put that on the board. And then let's also put Prashant's first comment on the board. So that was this one. So find out assumptions, maybe. I mean, if they're obvious enough to you, although you shouldn't really. You shouldn't really have to explicitly point out the assumptions, and in fact, that might just make things kind of hard. So, and then Joni says, review the answers and see which ones strengthen or weaken the argument. This might seem like it's kind of obvious, although there's a good point in here, which is that you actually should go through the answers. I mean, if anyone is thinking, well, of course you should, remember that there are some problem types where you shouldn't do that. There are some problem types where you should actually predict your own. So there you go. So let's talk about these. Let's talk about the first one. Find out assumptions, maybe. That's usually kind of hard to do, and it's not terribly necessary in this case. So some commentary underneath there. Find out assumptions, maybe only if it's easy for you to do this. Like if you can see very, very clearly what the assumptions are, then that might help you. But you can definitely tell whether things strengthen or weaken arguments without having to explicitly point out arguments. So that's not a necessary thing to do. But the conclusion, yes. And what the conclusion will do is the conclusion should reveal what is the main issue in the argument. So here's the first piece of insight here, is that strength and weaken problems have a very narrow focus. There's infrequently more than one issue, but there is usually one issue that you are trying to address, and you should ignore all other issues. So yeah, the new information thing, we'll come back to that in a second, and then, but first let's do an example, right? Let's do an example where you guys have to just come up with stuff on your own. So here's an example. My friend is eating more food than ever before. Therefore, he is going to get fat. How could you weaken this argument? In other words, give some example weakeners. So right now you don't have the benefit of answer choices, but let's see if you can come up with stuff that would actually weaken this argument. This thing, Duke, I'm not sure what you mean by that exactly. Joni says could be eating more for training. Okay, hey, what? Let me change get fat to gain weight so that the whole underweight thing isn't really an issue. Okay, so now that says, and then it also doesn't sound so rude or whatever. So, okay, therefore he's going to gain weight. He is eating more, but he's also working out more. Maybe he wasn't eating. Yeah, eating all healthy food. There we go. Any other ideas? So let's put some of these on the board and talk about them. So there's an idea. There's an idea. And we're going to evaluate these ideas in a second. They may not all be legitimate strengtheners or weakeners. So, but this one that Joni said, this is kind of the same as what Renee said. So those people are on the same page. Same thing with the fat-free food, well, at least, yeah, that kind of thing. What is more food, more calories, volume type. Okay, so most of you guys, Not necessarily. Okay, so let's talk about these things. Let me clean up the desktop here in a little bit. Okay, so this is a legitimate weakener, right? I mean, if it's phrased as a question. I mean, let's change this a little bit so that it says, this first statement, let's change it so that it says, my friend is eating lower calorie foods than he ate before. So that means this would weaken the argument because the more food in this case doesn't necessarily mean extra food energy. So if this is true, more food doesn't translate into more calories. This one we're going to skip and come back to. These are also weakeners. So that first one is a legitimate weakener. So is this, because if he is exercising more than before, he may burn off extra calories. So this is also a weakener. The reason why these two here are not weakeners, which they aren't, these other two, those are not weakeners, and the reason why they're not is that we're just talking about gaining weight over and above my friend's present state. So because we're not talking about like a healthy weight or reasonable or something like that. Like the only issue is whether my friend will weigh more than he did previously. So even if this was the case, even if he was under-eating and underweight, my argument still works perfectly. Like even if his weight is, it used to say get fat, but we changed it. And this was typed after we changed the argument. So, the point here is that you got to focus on the issue. So the issue is my friend going to get bigger than he is now? So that's the only real issue in the problem. Is my friend's weight going to go up? Notice that whether it's a healthy weight or underweight or overweight, we don't care. We just care about, is it going to go up from where it is now? And the change, yeah, so the change in the argument. Ooh, that was an accident. All right, so that's why these are not weakeners, because they don't address the issue. Smiley face if you guys understand that. Smiley face icon. Okay, good stuff. Now, let's discuss the process here, because the thing with these problems is that when you study them very, very, very formally, they get much harder to deal with because you lose your ability to think like a kind of regular person. So let's talk about, let's go ahead and kill the ones that are not weakeners and leave the ones that are on the board. So let's talk about these statements. Some observations here. The first observation is that it's unnecessary to explicitly identify assumptions before judging whether a statement strengthens or weakens the argument. Like, you don't really have to do that. I mean, you know, like these assumptions, these weakeners do correspond to certain assumptions. Namely, they like go against certain assumptions. But the problem is it's not the way the human brain works. Like if you try to identify assumptions first, you are actually making the task harder. because the human brain is not wired that way. Like, our brains are not wired to make assumptions explicit. Because, in fact, after all, this is why they are assumptions in the first place. On the other hand, strengthening and weakening is something that comes perfectly naturally to human beings. Like, we very naturally judge whether things strengthen or weaken arguments. In fact, I mean, okay, like when you're 5 years old, you of course have no idea what an assumption is. But when you are 5 years old, you can totally strengthen and weaken arguments already. Like, let's say that you knock a baseball through a window, and your dad is really mad at you. And your dad is like, you put that baseball through the window. I mean, you can already strengthen and weaken that argument. You don't want to strengthen it. But you could be like, no, it wasn't me. It was the kid down the street. It was magic. It was God. The baseball fell out of the sky. I mean, these are not particularly good weakeners, but that's not the point. The point is that they are weakeners, and as a 5-year-old child, you already understand that. So identifying assumptions makes your job harder, because, I mean, that's not something that, your theoretical 5-year-old can do. So it's not natural to us. Identifying weakening and strengthening, however, is very natural. So that's observation number one. You don't have to directly identify assumptions. Observation number two is all strengtheners and weakeners come from outside the existing scope of what is given. Every single one of them, always, all the time. Does everybody understand why this is the case? Like, why do strengtheners and weakeners always have to come from outside the scope? Can anybody explain that? Like, notice this argument doesn't talk about lower calorie food at all. So this is a totally new thing. This argument doesn't talk about exercise at all. So this is a totally new thing. Like, they should generally be totally new considerations. Why? A couple people are typing. They should be things that are not in the current argument. Yeah, Jenna, that's a very good summary of it. I mean, if we stayed in the scope of the argument, we would neither strengthen nor weaken the argument because, yeah, you would just be covering already what's already been covered. So that's not going to help you, right? If you just restate things that have been stated, then you have the same argument. So it's a very good observation. So back to what people said on this one. So yes, right, this is absolutely true. The only word that I object to in this statement is the word may. That should actually say must. So let's go ahead and make that as emphatic as it properly should be. You cannot strengthen or weaken an argument by providing information that already exists. So must. Also, let's talk about this. Review the answers. I mean, if that seems like, oh, that's really obvious, what you should remember is that there are other types of problems, such as boldface, on which you shouldn't go through the answer choices. Instead, you should just predict the answer. On the other hand, this is not like that. The difference here is that there will be many, in general, many ways to weaken or strengthen an argument. And it's impossible to tell which one you're going to see. So therefore, you need to just go through the answer choices. Don't try to predict. Because if you try to predict the answer to these things, a lot of the time you will come up with predictions that are totally legit, but are not their answer. Like again, back to this example. I mean, let's say that I see an argument that amounts to this. Then if I say, I'm going to predict that they say, my friend is working out more. It's great. It would work. It would definitely weaken the argument. And what if they gave me that instead? If they gave me that, I'm going to be like, oh, wow, I wasn't looking for that. So no predicting. It's going to come from outside, and you have to just go through the choices, unlike other problem types, such as boldface and so on. So, okay, now let's revisit that one problem. There's a comment here that I want to respond to real quick. Trang, I'm not real sure how to pronounce that. Okay. I'm not really going to just answer this. Instead, I'm going to kind of, is Trang? Okay. I'm not really going to answer this question directly. Instead, I'm going to focus on these 5 words, which I guess it's 4 words. So the trick is, this is a wrong way to think about critical reasoning in general. Like, let's pause for a second and say, and then talk about this in general. What's the point of critical reasoning problems? Like, why are they on the test? What do you guys think? Charlie, elaborate a little bit. What do you mean when you say logic? Also, Duke, I don't know what information management means either. That sounds like a major at business school, but I don't know what it means. Nane, Nane, I don't know how to pronounce that. That's pretty good. Let's see what other people are typing. See, Charlie's typing, explaining the logic comment. Joni is typing. In the meantime, I'm going to throw some of that up on the board. And this is good. See what else we have to say here. Still waiting on a couple people who are typing. Yeah, I guess I still don't really know what you mean when you say a system of thought. Like that's still sort of ambiguous. Like when you say a system of thought, do you mean like a system that has tangible rules that can be articulated? Or do you just mean that there's like some thing that works in some way? I like that. I like the short answer. Let's see what Charlie and Duke are saying, and we'll have a discussion here. I mean, because if you just say there is a flow of thought, that is, of course, true. There is a flow of thought. But in and of itself, it's not a terribly meaningful thing to say, because there's always a flow of thought wherever there are thoughts. So, well, Tron, we haven't really discussed these yet. So, and in general, you're not really going to find a quick, dirty way. So don't get your hopes up for that. Let's wait for Charlie to finish typing, then we'll discuss. Okay, so that is kind of, I mean, it's still kind of specific. I'm looking more for more general statements, but yeah, that's not wrong. So I mean, that's good. But let's get that one off the board and talk about these three. So like these, yes, to evaluate critical thinking, to get you to think, as opposed to what? Like, what is that the opposite of? What is the opposite of thinking? Okay, the opposite of thinking is not thinking. I mean, that is very true, but not terribly meaningful. I mean, what do people do often instead of thinking? Like, what is the alternative option that is opposed to thinking about things? That's better. Right. Okay. Acquiesce, not so much though. Like that's not really applicable to critical reasoning. Here's a hint. You don't really have to think about what a red light means when you drive a car. It's a good thing. You wouldn't really want people to have to think too much about traffic signals, because then people would die. Instead of thinking about it, what have you done when it comes to a red light? Like, you know to stop at the red light because you what? Not because you think about it, but because you, well, react could be thinking or not thinking. It's not inherent. I mean, we're not born with stopping at red lights in our brain. It's because you memorize it, is where I'm going. So thinking is the opposite of trying to memorize rules. That's where we're going with that. So this is exactly right, and the realization you have to make, and we've said this in previous sessions, but it's worth saying in every single session where we talk about critical reasoning, is that you cannot master critical reasoning by using memorized rules. It's impossible. It's not just really hard, it's actually not possible. In fact, there's a name for trying to do this. There's a name for trying to take human reasoning and reduce it to a set of rules. Like that whole effort to reduce human reasoning to rules is called artificial intelligence, strong artificial intelligence. And nobody has ever been able to do that. Not even close. Like, no one has ever come remotely close to being able to do this. So if any of you guys are actually approaching this by trying to memorize a bunch of rules, then what you are doing, whether you realize it or not, is you are trying to invent artificial intelligence by yourself. That's ambitious, but it's not really going to happen. It's impossible to do that. So you have to think about the situation. And another good comment here is it's a real world thing. Very true. So real world is the key words here. Like you have to, like the whole point of these problems is not to be things that are like academic. Okay, the farther away your viewpoint is from school, the better off you are. Like you must use the same kind of thinking and intuition that works in basically in the real world on planet Earth. So hold on a second. Sorry about that brief delay there. SJ, let's talk about that because maybe yes, maybe no. It depends on how you think about those things. So, But let's discuss this further. And let's talk about it, because this is not a joke. It really is impossible. So let's talk about this comment. Because this comment it's a good question. And it's the kind of question that because the answer is basically yes, but also no. So let's talk about the way in which it's yes and the way in which it's no. This is yes in the sense that you can't solve these problems with formulas. Okay, but no in the sense that you should do the following. The first thing that you should do with all the specific things is you should verify that they are things that you already know. This is going to sound weird to some people here, but every single thing you see as a, quote, critical reasoning strategy, unquote, should absolutely be something that you already know and have known since you were kind of young. So, like, let's give an example. Let me find it here in the chat box. Like this. This is a good example. Like this. This is for how to weaken a cause and an effect argument. I mean, this is not really something that you don't know already. This is something that you have known since you were like 6 years old. So, like, you already know this. Let me prove this to you. Like, Dad, you're 6 years old. Dad says you broke that window. You're in trouble. So, well, this is the cause, and this is the effect, right? And you are the cause of that effect. And you are like, no, I didn't do it. The neighbor kid did it. So this is like an alternate reason type of thing. I mean, so my point is that none of these are going to be anything that you don't already know. And my other point is that when you put it into this kind of form, it's a lot harder to understand. Like, this should be an instinct that you already have. You caused the window to break. No, someone else caused the window to break. You can totally already do this. So, a couple of points about this. The first point is that stating these things as abstract rules will just make things 1,000 times harder. Like, use examples. Don't memorize abstract rules. The second thing is, why is it easier to think about breaking a window than it is to think about cause and effect situations involving like widgets being produced in a factory? Like, that's a real question. Like, why is it easier to solve the problem about, oh, you broke the window, no, I didn't, someone else broke the window? What makes that easier? Because that's a very deep question if you think about it. That might sound like a stupid question at first, but it's really not a stupid question. Because the logic is exactly the same. Personal reference, experience, there you go. So, like, the things that matter in critical reasoning, what you are probably starting to discover here are not the things that you think matter if you approach this like it's some objective science. Right? Like, the reason why that's easier is because we are humans, and if we are personally involved in a situation. So if you can be personally involved in a situation, then it is much, much easier to think about and comprehend. Like, there's a lot of very, very powerful examples of this. Like, I mean, I have lots and lots of friends who are, like, afraid of basic math. Like, oh my God, that's a percent. That scares me. I don't know how percents work. I can't do fractions, blah, 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 whatever. But then these same friends of mine, if you give them, like, baseball statistics, they will become instant geniuses. You know why? Because they care about baseball. That's why. It's because they are personally involved. They are fans of the sport, and that makes things easier to understand. So what this means is, yeah, you should personalize the argument. So in addition to verifying these are things you already know, you should generate your own examples of them. And then, in general, personalize the argument. I mean, what this means is two things. This means, number one, pretend that someone whom you like or care about is telling you this stuff. Or, number two, like, put yourself into the situation, if possible. And I mean, this may not be super easy to do here, but my factory story, I don't know what you mean by a factory story. This may not be super easy to do here, but becoming involved in the situation is what makes these things easier to think about. And the problem with memorizing rules, apart from the fact that it's impossible in the first place, is that it directly prevents you from doing this. Because if you think about it, the one thing that differs between, like, personally involved situations and personally detached situations is that you use rules only when you don't care. If you care about a situation, you use your intuition, and if you don't, you use rules. So rules will not only not work, but they will also prevent you from thinking in the way that you have to think. It's a very dangerous and risky kind of thing. So, no rules. They're not academic. It's real-world thinking. It really is kind of like, oh, the neighbor kid broke the window and I didn't. So now let's talk about this. Let's go back to this problem. So, soybeans. Blah, 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 blah. It's been a while, but let's see if we remember what's going on here. Who can tell me what is the issue in this argument? Like, the only issue in the you broke the window argument is who broke the window. What's the issue in this argument? Like, what are you trying to settle? That is a fact. So that's not really an issue. Yeah, will raising cotton bring lots of... Remember, guys, don't state facts. Don't say insect infestations caused blah, because, okay, fine, that's a fact. It's not really an issue. The soybean producer wants to do this, also not the issue. The issue is, will it increase profits? So this is the conclusion of the argument. The issue is that. The issue is, will a change to cotton increase the profits of these farmers? In general, you should be able to do this. Like, the issues should boil down to things that you can state as yes or no questions. Like that's a yes or no question. So, and in general, the issues should be reducible to that sort of thing. Because, you know, then it winds up with a yes is a strengthen or a no is a weaken. Or in some questions, a no is a strengthen and a yes is a weaken. But that's how this stuff works. So basically anything that addresses any other issue, anything that doesn't directly address this issue is not correct. So let's take a look. What should they cease growing soybeans? Right, but it's not should they do that in general. It's will it make them more money? You know, it's kind of like you make your own analogy to this kind of thing, or put yourself in the farmer's place, right? The issue here is I mean, yes, that's the point, but the argument is specifically that it will increase their income, and that's why they should do it. The argument is they should grow cotton because it will make them more money. So the real issue at hand here is, will it make them more money or not? So, meaning that's the only stated reason. So you're not looking at other reasons to grow cotton won't matter here. The point is that cotton will make you more money, therefore you should grow it. So let's see how these things affect the issue. The cost of raising soybeans has increased over the past several years and is expected to continue to climb. This means that basically what A means, and what you should do here is put the answers into your own, put everything into your own words. So the passage says that cotton prices have jumped because of insect issues. The farmers are counting on these higher prices. They want to switch to cotton in order to make more money. A says that soybeans are getting more expensive. What effect does that have on this question in a text box? Will changing to cotton increase the profits? It may not lead to increased profits, but this helps this decision because, what this means is that you're going to get even less profit from soybeans. So this makes soybeans even less profitable. So, it doesn't directly affect the issue of whether cotton will increase your profits. Because even if this is the case, it doesn't affect how much money you're going to make from cotton. But it's the wrong way. Like, this goes the wrong way. Because it makes cotton seem more attractive and soybeans less so. Let's talk about choice B. Choice B is that there's now a way to kill off the pests. What does that mean? What's the consequence of that? Yeah. Oh, hey. It means it's going to undo this. Because the only reason that cotton prices are high is because of these insects that are, defiling all the cotton crops. So the farmers are counting on the higher prices, but if you get rid of the insects, then there's no reason why the price would stay high. The price will return to normal. So this does work against the argument. because the farmers need these insects to keep infesting the cotton plants, because otherwise the prices will not stay high. Versus C is there has been no sharp increase. Like cotton demand has stayed pretty much the same. That doesn't really help you, and it doesn't really hurt you. It just doesn't really have any effect, because there's no reason to believe that. I mean, a lot of people picked this choice, so it'd be interesting to see what the reasoning was there. But maybe people thought this meant that it's more likely that there's going to be a big increase because there hasn't been one. But that's not really how things work in the world. I mean, you know, in fact, if there's not a lot of increase in demand, then there's no reason to think that there would suddenly be an increase in demand. So, if there was no increase in the demand, then growers wouldn't make as much money. Yeah. So, Mira, that means you should, but it doesn't say decrease, right? It doesn't say that it'll go down. It just says that there's no notable changes. So, I mean, you can't take no increase to mean decrease. It's just what it is. No notable changes. So this doesn't have any effect on the argument. Because the reason why farmers are making more money here, supposedly, is that there are bugs killing off cotton crops. It's not an increase in demand for cotton. That's not why the price has gone up. So we don't really care about that. I mean, if the choice said that demand for cotton is going to go down, then you would have something, because that would actually drive down prices. But steady demand, right? So we don't know. There's no change from that. That doesn't strengthen and it doesn't weaken. Steady demand at a high price could still make them money, right? Yeah, sure. That's the point, right? The price is already high because of this. They don't need they're not counting on an increase in prices. Like there's a couple ways this could work. The first way is if this said the demand will go down, then it would weaken the argument. The second is if a passage said that farmers were counting on more demand for cotton. Like if it said that, then saying something like this would weaken the argument, because their expectations are not met. But they don't need an increase in demand. They don't care. The prices are high because of these bugs. So this doesn't affect it. Let's pull this over to the next page and talk about the other choices. I don't think anybody picked the other choices, but people are willing to pay higher prices. I mean, if anything, this goes in favor of cotton. So it's good for the argument. You want it to be bad for the argument. And then E, the species has never been known to infest soybean plants. This is kind of pro-soybean, but we don't really care. Like, every plant has its own pest. So this is not relevant. If it said that soybeans had like no possible pests that would ever infest them, then maybe. But you wouldn't expect this to be true anyway. It's kind of like, I mean, if I say that the human flu virus doesn't make dogs sick, that doesn't mean that dogs are any less likely to get sick. Same sort of thing. So this is this. So there you go. I mean, Trung, you should realize that things that have happened in the past are not generally predictors of stuff, but there may be circumstances under which they are. Like, So it's again, you have to think like a real person. You can't like attempt to memorize some sort of blanket rule like this. It's not gonna work. I mean, let me elaborate on this a little bit. Like, you're saying that if past stuff is not necessarily a predictor of present stuff. I mean, you have to think about the situation, right? You have to. It's not objectively a rule. You have to think about whether this is true for the situation in question. Like, for instance, for human behavior, past instances don't necessarily predict future instances. Like, for instance, if you say, like, Joe has gone to 10 parties and has not drunk alcohol at any of them, this doesn't mean that Joe won't drink at the next party. Like, you can't say that Joe won't drink in the future. But, like, for things that are not human behavior and are predictable, then the past events could absolutely be predicted. Like, you know, for things that don't change, however, I mean, past events will totally predict future events. Like, for instance, if you say something like, when scientists attempted to, like, hook electrodes up to substance X, no electricity was generated. I mean, the point is that this is not a thing that makes decisions and might change its mind, right? If this didn't happen once, it's not going to happen in other times, too. Like, this is a thing that either happens or doesn't. Like, this either will or won't happen, because that's how things work in chemistry. So therefore, you can absolutely trust that substance X won't suddenly start conducting electricity in the future. So, I mean, you can't avoid the thinking angle here. You really can't. I mean, if it's something like the behavior of an individual human being, then yeah, that's going to be unpredictable. On the other hand, if it's, you know, things that are not unpredictable, then they're not unpredictable. You can't shortcut the thinking here. And I mean, what I'm seeing here is that you keep asking questions about how to shortcut the thinking. Like, what that means is that you're actually resisting the idea of thinking about the situations, which is not, that doesn't bode well. I mean, it means that you don't want to think about these the way that you have to. You got to kind of get off of that and be like, let me apprehend the situation and put myself into it, and that whole bit. So, okay. Let's look at another problem, and let's throw one on the board, and we will do it. Here's another problem. Try that. Clear out your answers. Remember to please use the answer buttons. Answer buttons. SJ, not really. Because by having those things, it's going to impede your ability to think. It's not going to help you. Like, if you have rules, then it's harder for you to not think in terms of those rules. It is more difficult. I mean, that's why people who grow up in, like, communities where there are lots and lots and lots of rules are sort of lost when they get outside those communities, like those insulated religious communities and stuff. I mean, the more strategies you remember and the more rules you have, the harder it is to not use them. So it is sort of dangerous. But, okay, try this. And Tron, I'm sorry if that came across the wrong way. I wasn't reading minds or anything like that. I was just saying that there are certain ways of thinking that, if taken to more of an extreme, will not help. A point worth saying. I'm not implying anything about the way that you, in particular, that your mind works. So I apologize if it came across that way. All right, here's a timer. All right, let's pick answers to this, please. Trung, I hope you were here when I responded to your comment. If you weren't here, I said if my comment came across as a certain way, then sorry about that. Okay, so remember, don't click your answer twice, guys. So a couple of you just erased your choice. Let's look at this. Nane, Nane, don't know how to say that. You don't have an answer right now, and Trung, you don't have an answer right now. So let's pick one, please. Okay. Here are your class statistics. There you go. So people like choice C here. But let's talk about it. What is the issue in this problem? What's the actual issue? Like, what are we trying to settle? Do more locks mean more robbery attempts? When you say maybe, depending on what you mean when you say mean. If you're talking about a cause and effect relationship, then you've got the cause and effect the other way. You've got the cause and effect backward. But if you mean an indication, yeah, Prashant, that's and Joni, that's the issue, right? Why did they install double doors? Like, actually not just locks. It's actually two sets of doors instead of one. It's not just two sets of locks. That's an extremely important point, so make sure you understand it. The issue is, were the double doors installed for security reasons or for some other reason? And that's what we need to settle. So anything that points to security reasons would be a strengthener of this argument. Like, it would make this argument stronger. Anything pointing to the idea that the doors were installed for some other reason would make this argument weaker. So let's talk about these in kind of order of popularity here. A lot of people like choice C, but let's talk about what choice C means. Like, why would you want what's the only reason why security guys would want to lock doors from a remote location? Like, why would they want to do that? Security people. And that's probably not the point. It's probably not if they forgot. I mean, remember, these are security people. These are not just bank employees who are closing up shop. These are the people whose job is security. Yeah, I mean, if they want to lock the doors from, like, their office or something, the most reasonable reason for that is so that they can, you know, prevent crime attempts or catch criminals or whatever. Like, the most reasonable interpretation here of this statement is that is that they want to lock the doors remotely for security reasons. Because, I mean, they forgot to lock the doors is not really such a great interpretation here, because that wouldn't, justify the installation of a new system of doors. Because you could go back and lock them. But if you had, security people wanting to lock doors without having to be in front of the people where the doors are, that is almost certainly so they can prevent crimes that are in progress. So you got to interpret this the right way. So that is not the way you want to go, because that strengthens the argument. What is something, so what we need is, we need to weaken the argument. We need something that is another reason, a different reason, why they would want to install the double doors that has absolutely no connection to security issues. Aha, choice A. Why choice A? What about weather? Like, what's the connection there? Yeah, weather's got nothing to do with security, and harsh winters give you a very good reason to not want your doors open, right? Like, the system only lets one of two doors open at a time. So harsh winters would explain this very, very well, because this system would effectively keep wintry weather out. So the locking part doesn't really affect the weather thing, but the fact that only one of two doors opens at a time is totally well explained by this in a way that doesn't have anything to do with security. So now to the people who are saying that it's out of scope, remember that that's not an objection. Like, remember that on strengthening and weakening problems, you need something that is out of scope. Like, if you stay in the set of statements of the argument, then your answer is not going to be correct, because you can't strengthen or weaken an argument with existing statements. So out of scope is not an objection here at all. And it doesn't really, I mean, it does require you to make extra assumptions, but that's what strengthen and weaken problems do. Like, they do require you to make extra assumptions. So the answer to this question is yes, but that's not a problem. In fact, that's how these things work. So, and I mean, you can refer to strength and weaken problems in any of your official materials. I mean, it doesn't require you to make a lot of assumptions. It requires you to make like one assumption, but this is how these problems work. Like, one of the motivations behind these problems is they test the ability to make, to interpret situations according to real world assumptions. And remember that it doesn't, like, okay, the other thing here is I think you guys are thinking that you have to totally destroy the argument. Like, you don't need something that proves that the doors are because of weather. Like, you don't need to prove that. Like, all you need is something else that provides a strong justification for having these doors. So it does. I mean, we don't know if it's this or if it's the security issue, but this is another reason why you would want the doors installed. So remember, it's not, in other words, the best way to summarize this here is to say that it's not confirm, destroy, it's strengthen, weaken. So these problems are not confirm, destroy. They are strengthen, weaken. Like you just need considerations that affect the argument in the desired direction. You don't need to prove the connections, or in other words, you're not confirming or destroying the argument. This is just something that, because this does weigh against the argument, right? If they have these super, super crazy winters in this town, then that's also a valid reason to have a double door system. In fact, if you are, if you go to places like Chicago, Minneapolis, places where it's really cold in the United States, then a lot more buildings have these double doors. And this is actually the reason why. So, not too far removed. I mean, if you're thinking too mechanically about the scope, then these problems are going to be trouble. So, be careful. Make sure you're thinking, and again, the real world mode of thinking is more flexible. But that's the issue here at the end of the day, is that if you're putting yourself in this situation and you see, you're walking through this town and you see all these double doors, and you're like, why are these here? Then choice A will make a lot more sense to you. If you're thinking about this like it's a bunch of academic statements, you're not going to come up with choice A. But if you imagine actually going through a town and seeing all these things and wondering why they are there, then your reaction would be, oh, that would explain why they are there. And that's the way that you should be thinking about these things. So are they the only instances? No. In fact, most of the question types, like if you have to explain a situation, that's real world thinking as well. Most of the critical reasoning, except for the very specialized question types, such as draw the conclusion and stuff. I mean, because that's the primary reason why they put critical reasoning on this exam, so that you do have to think in a very real world sort of way. So before we close here, SJ has been typing for some time now, so SJ must have a lot to say. We'll see what appears in the box here. Take away from the session. That is a very good summary of this. Yeah. You first identify the main issue, then review that's a very, very good summary. Excellent. So let's talk about, in the couple minutes that we have left here, yeah, someone's doing the clapping hands for SJ. Yeah, it's tricky unless you can personally involve yourself in the situation. Because, I mean, this is the point, this is why you need to personalize these problems. Because then identifying the main issue will not be tricky at all. It'll be something that you totally intuit because you're in the situation. So, like, if you can personalize the situation, e.g. walking through this town and wondering, why are all these double doors here? Then the issue will be clear. It's only hard because, remember the example of my friend in the baseball statistics. It's only hard because it's not like that. It's only hard because you don't care about it. Like if you can, I mean, it's not super easy to start caring about it, but if you can do that, then you will be in very good shape. If you can start inserting yourself into the situation, you will be in very good shape. So keep that in mind. Let me talk about, before we close up shop here, let me talk about one more thing that you can do on strength and weaken questions that will help your reasoning process a lot. And we're going to do some more of these next study hall because we only got to do 2 or 3 problems today. One extraordinarily valuable review tool is to make alternate correct answers. In other words, make another answer choice that would also be correct if it were to appear in the choices. Because remember, this is a thought process that is somewhat natural when you are involved in a situation. It's actually very natural. Like in the case of, hey, you broke the window, you can see that in order to weaken that, you have to blame the breaking of the window on someone else. I mean, you can see that that's how it works. So, and you can come up with lots and lots of alternate ways to weaken an argument. You know, instead of it was a neighbor kid, it was anything else. It was a hailstorm. It was a this. It was a that. Anything that, you know, throws things at windows. It was a robbery attempt. Someone broke through the window. Anything like that. So let me give you an illustration here. We're sort of running out of time, so I don't think we can hold a class on this, but let me give you an example of another possible correct answer here, which is totally different. Because remember, what we need is anything else besides security-related considerations that explains the presence of the double doors. So here's an example of another correct answer. An example of another correct answer would be Inverness has a law specifying that all banks must have at least one 24-hour ATM indoors. And that would also be a correct answer here. Smiley face if you understand why that's also a correct answer, and other face if you don't. Okay, so that's mostly smiley faces. Good, right, because the reasoning here is, I mean, it's very different. It's not we're trying to keep the wind out anymore. But it's still a reason why you would want to have double door systems. Like, Charlie, it's not nothing to do with the main issue. The main issue is it security or not? So you're confusing things that have nothing to do with security with things that have nothing to do with the issue. I mean, things that are unrelated to security are very relevant if they explain what's happening here, because then they explain it in a non-security related way. And that's exactly what you're looking for. So I hope that helps. But yeah, this works because it's a way, I mean, if there's this law, because banks are not open 24 hours a day, so if they have this law in Inverness, then they're going to have one set of doors that, you know, is in front of the ATM. And then behind and that's going to be 24 hours or whatever. And then behind the ATM, they're going to have a second set of doors that goes into the bank and is closed at off hours. So this would also make sense. It's you know, not any less or more relevant than the weather thing. It's just another way to explain. So if you can get yourself to come up with things like this, it'll go a long way toward helping you adopt the right mentality here. Because you can see what I mean about rules. Like, a rule is just going to tell you, at best it's going to tell you something like, oh, we need an alternate cause. But it will not generate answers. Like, it won't give you a correct answer. It'll just, at best, it'll give you very, very generic statements about the correct answer. So in order to actually make a choice like this, you have to be thinking in the optimal way about these situations. So any quick questions where the operative word here is quick? If you've got anything fast, go ahead and ask. We'll address it. We got to close up shop here in a little bit though, and then we're going to continue this in 2 weeks. We're going to have more strengthening and weakening action in 2 weeks, because you can tell this has been a very, very productive topic in terms of generating not only productive learning but also debate. So we're going to cover it again later. So if anybody has any quick things. Is there a way of knowing? Yeah, it did seem strange at first, yeah, because remember these things come from outside the scope, so they might seem weird. It's very true. Knowing the topics that I will cover ahead of time, I choose the topics according to what people submit, and I don't make that decision until about an hour before the session. So there's no way to find out what we're going to cover, because I don't even know what we're going to cover until it's about 30 minutes out. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If you have any admin questions or anything, you can pose those really quickly. Thank you for attending.